Well, top of the morning to you. What a pity, thought Ned Atling, as he came out of his trance and scrambled down his stepladder, tripping awkwardly over his Armanthian robes. What a pity that they never heard my verse about the heathen grail. Meanwhile, a burly Taunton policeman, under Cordelia's direction, was pouring brandy down Mr. Evans's throat. Other policemen were pushing the crowd back so that the prostrate man might have more air and space around them. Megangird, supported by Mr. Bishop, the town clerk, and by Bob Shepherd, the old Glastonbury policeman, was now standing nearby, out of breath and very much concerned. "He'll come round now, ma'am. Don't you take on. He'll come round now. Miss Curdle'll bring us to senses quick enough, you'll see, ma'am." Thus did old Bob comfort his worship's lady, while the equally infirm town clerk made feeble efforts to get down on his knees by the side of the ghastly figure on the ground. But the aged public servant was so fat and scant of breath that this gesture remained unfulfilled. "Oh, mother, mother, what shall we do? What shall we do?" moaned Cordelia, losing her nerve at the familiar sound of her mother's panting breath. "I had poured a lot of this stuff down his throat, but he doesn't... Doctor be here, doctor be come!" This welcome cry arose among a group of Roman soldiers, the smell of whose bare legs, hot and grass-stained, had become a part of that day that lodged itself in Cordelia's memory. The Taunton policeman now cleared a path for Dr. Fell. "His heart's beating, doctor," cried Cordelia. "I've got my hand on it. It's beating funnily, but it's beating still." The doctor placed his hat on the grass and knelt down over the prostrate man, who lay with his mouth grimly open. There was a great streak of blood on his chest and another on his shirt, and his lips were caked with blood. "He's burst a blood vessel of some kind," murmured Dr. Fell. "The question is, what kind? Did he faint away as soon as he had shouted those words?" It was to Persephone, who had been sitting all this while upon the fallen cross as it lay on the ground, that the doctor addressed this remark. She leaned forward to answer him, rearranging as she did so the folds of her sky-blue robe. "Yes, doctor," she said in a low, rather guttural voice. It was a strain of that shout. "But I think he was uncomfortable before. I think he was in distress before. I believe he was in considerable pain for quite a long time before." There was a queer hysterical ring in the girl's voice as her words mounted up. When she came to the word pain, she shouted it with a vibration of anger. The doctor mechanically wiped off some blood from Mr. Evans's bare chest with the tips of his fingers. "He'll have to get him to the hospital," he said, "and, what's more, get him there as quickly as we can." He rose on one knee, still keeping the tips of his fingers on the unconscious man's chest. "Who's got a car in the field?" he said. Persephone rose to her feet and came forward, catching up her trailing blue garments round one bare arm and hitching another fold of it into her belt as she moved. "My car is just over that ridge, doctor," she said. "It's by itself there, and there are no other nearer than the road. If you don't mind me being like this," and she spread out her long bare arms and gave a toss of her head, from which her curls hung in a loose mass, "I'll drive him there in a jiffy, only he must be carried to my car. I can't get it over the bank." Dr. Fell stood up. "Will you carry him, officers?" he said, addressing the nearest policeman. Three of the men in uniform stepped forward and, under the doctor's directions, lifted up the unconscious Mr. Evans. Cordelia turned to Persephone. The last time she had spoken to this girl was on the reception room of Mother Legge, and as their eyes met now, they both recalled this encounter. It was Cordelia then who had been dressed in blue. Thank you, Mrs. Spear," she murmured with intense emphasis. "You may be saving his life by this." The three policemen, with Cordelia walking behind them, carried their burden where Persephone led. She and Dr. Fell moved on fast in front, talking earnestly. The doctor was explaining to Persephone in an unprofessional language as he could Just what he feared, just what he hoped as to the injured man's chances. "You'd better go home, Mother," cried Cordelia, stopping for a moment to turn her troubled face to Mrs. Gird. "But you're coming back, aren't you, darling?" cried the descendant of the House of Rise, extricating her arms from that of old Bob Shepherd. "They'll never have room for you in that little car." Cordelia waved her hands impatiently at her mother, as much as to say, "You look after yourself, dear." But she turned them, and running after the slowly moving bearers joining the melancholy cortege without another word. Megangird sighed deeply. "I wish the mayor were here," she remarked to the old Glastonbury policeman. Bob Shepherd cordially endorsed her wish. "If his worship had been here, the poor man would never have died," he said. Megangird gave a start and a sudden shiver ran through her. "You don't think he is dead, Mr. Shepherd, do you?" she groaned. The old policeman wagged his head. "I've seen many a corpse in me time, marm, and not a one of 'em but had blood or just that colour, dry-like and sticky-like, on his poor's lips." When they reached the little car, it became only too plain that it was if one of the policemen sat by Persephone's side to help carry him in. When they got to the hospital, there was only just room for Dr. Fell and his unconscious patient. "Take care! Go gently! Oh, go gently!" Cordelia cried, clutching the sun-warmed door-frame of the machine as it swung open while they were lifting Mr. Evans in. But an intruder now appeared upon the scene, whose strange appearance startled and shocked the girl, even in her desperate concern. It was none other than Mad Bet, who had persuaded her good friend Solly Lou to conduct her to the particular spot from which she could observe and not be observed. The kind-hearted taxi driver had remained here with the woman for quite a long while. Then, watching with the eye of a hungry man the rush of the dye works people into Dickory Cantle's tent, he had gone off to get a bite of summit for 5 minutes. The mad woman had left her hat, trimmed with forget-me-nots, under the hornbeam bush where she had been sitting, and her egg-white cranium was a disturbing object even to Dr. Fell, who had known her for his youth up. To the Taunton policeman, as, panting and perspiring, they withdrew from the car's door, this new apparition was still more startling. They thought for a moment that she was one of the players and that this shocking baldness was a mask. "Only to touch the hem of his garment, only to touch his coatsies or terosies," gabbled Mad Bet, pushing Cordelia out of the way and struggling to stretch her arms into the car. "He told I had mother legs," the woman went on, "to come midsummer day, and see he cast out his devil, and I seed he do it. I seed that girt devil flying over Tortop, with wings of dragon. He be Jesus that he's one self now, the poor man be. Don't ye drop him in the grave, Doctor, don't ye let them put stones on his poor bleeding heart. Where he's going to be lay him, then, gents, where be? Mad Bet'll come and watch over he. Night and day she will, till he rolls they stones away." "Don't do that," cried Dr. Fell sharply, when one of the Taunton policemen began unceremoniously pulling the woman's back. "Let her just touch him once. There, that's enough now. Look, here's a friend of yours coming." The doctor's words were justified, for hatless as herself and very much the worse for drink, Solly Lou could be observed staggering up the hill and frantically waving his arms. "He thinks the police are taking her," remarked the doctor laconically, clambering in beside the unconscious man, who was lying limp and heavy across the seat. Mad Bet caught the words police and the words take, but her whole soul was so stirred by what she had seen that no fear for her own skin could touch her. She had been allowed to do what she had set her heart on doing, and she drew back now quite quickly and stood immobile, looking like a ghastly waxworks of Madame Tussauds. Dr. Fell's attention, the moment he had settled himself on the edge of the seat, against the patient's bare-robed, bruised ankles, was attracted by the sight of a little bird deliberately alighting upon the topmost twig of the stunted hornbeam. It's a lesser white throat, he thought to himself. Cordelia's distracted face was thrust into the window of the car. He won't die, Doctor, will he? He could do nothing but shake his head and murmur, careful now, as the unhappy girl snatched at one of the injured man's hands and, careless of who saw her, pressed upon it a feverish kiss. He won't die, Doctor, will he? He won't die, Doctor. I couldn't. But Persephone had already got her machine in motion. He's in good hands, miss. In very good hands, murmured one of the Taunton policemen who had been left behind, as they watched the car descend the rough kettle track that led round the eastern side of the Tor. That clever actress be a first-class driver, miss, remarked the other man. And everybody knows Dr. Fell. I've a seed myself many a time in Taunton Freme, where he were younger than he'd be now. There ain't much a man as old Fell, no. Not this side of Bristol. The policemen were so terrifying to Sally Lou that he had not dared to advance. Mad Bet, however, walked slowly towards him, keeping her eyes on the disappearing car. As Persephone drove into town with her heavy load that eventful afternoon, her nature was undergoing the strangest upheaval. Since her quarrel with Philip, she had spoken to him only once. There had been indeed nothing to be said between them. She had turned, as people say, against him. His particular kind of passion had come to be revolting to her. Her deep riddle now was how she had ever been attracted to him, or let him touch her at all. In her husband's case, she had only arrived at a point of departure towards which she had been steadily moving for months. With him, she had no overt rupture. But for the last week or so, she had ceased to share his bed. But the sight of this man, Evans, hanging on that cross had hit something in her that was very deep. A nerve, perhaps it was, rather than anything else in her weary heart. But it was a dark, strange pull, a rending tug at this queer nerve, an inexplicable feeling, and one to which she yielded now in an abandoned mood of delicious languor. This sudden, melting, tender sensation, utterly unexpected and mysterious to herself, did not seem to affect her recognition of Mr. Evans as a queer, impossible person. He might be the most ridiculous person in the world. He might be a madman. It remained that something wild, dark, desperate in the man as he hung there, something in his somber, contorted face, with his great Roman nose and massive forehead, something in his lean, extended arms, something in his exposed shoulder blades, something even in the black hairs of his chest, now caked with crimson blood, had touched a nerve in her being, an organic nerve that went down to the dark, deep knot of erotic mystery in the center of her woman's nature. She had divined in a way no other soul had done, certainly not Cordelia, the vein of thrilling exultation in Dr. Evans's mood that had supported him in that atrocious endurance. Well, I think we'll stop there for today a little early, but gotta get on with my day. Until next time, I'll see you in lots of berry cheers.